Well, Dan Lanning is off to a pretty terrible start in his coaching career for the Ducks. But he's not the first, which is why it's not time to panic. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster and lifelong Oregon Ducks fan. Thank you for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Like, comment, subscribe wherever you're listening to or watching this show. We're inching closer. 1,000 subscriptions on YouTube. We are almost there. Thank you to everybody out there for making that happen. And an advance thank you as well to everybody who is not overreacting to what was, by all accounts, an embarrassing, bad, no good, very terrible, ugly, and bad feeling loss Saturday against Georgia. I'm not trying to sugarcoat how that game went. It was bad. It was worse than I expected, and it was on Lanning and the staff. It's not a good start to his coaching career. It's not. But he's not the first coach to get off to a bad start. He's not even the first Oregon coach to get off to a bad start as the head man. The first play of the Mario Cristobal era was a timeout, which is a little bit funny looking back on it and such. But that was the first play. Did that give you the most confidence in the world? The first play for a bowl game against Boise State was a timeout. Did that make you feel, hey, this guy might win a Pac-12 championship, get to another one? Is that how you felt at that in that particular moment? No, I don't think so. And by the way, that game against Boise State got beat pretty bad. Chip Kelly, speaking of Boise State, do we all remember that debacle in 2009? The defense came ready to play, held Boise State to 19 points, but we know now Chip Kelly didn't do, anything on the defensive side of the ball throughout the week. So Nick Galeotti had his guys ready. Chip was the offensive coordinator. That was an easier situation than taking over at a completely new program the way Dan Lanning is doing right now. Chip was just sliding in, just to kind of keep the ball rolling. Things run mostly the same, but Chip gets to make a few more, or got to make, I should say, a few more executive decisions. That first game against Boise State, the offense was putrid. 8 points against the Broncos. Don't care if it's on the road and they're a top 25 team. You shouldn't have scored 8 points. But it didn't start out very well, but it ended pretty darn well. First games are difficult. First seasons are difficult for head coaches. No coach that Oregon has had ever had his best season in his first full year as head coach. Mario didn't. We throw Willie Taggart out the window. Helfrich didn't. When he took over, right, year 2 was better than year 1. Chip Kelly did not. It hasn't happened. It could take an entire year for Lanning to reach a ceiling as a head coach. Looking at this game, and ugly though it was, and saying, well, this is just not going to work out. What if we'd said that about Chip? It was arguably worse. Again, it's a little bit different, but the fact that you had to restrain LeGarrette Blount, going out starting a fight up in Boise, that was a horrendous look for the program back in the day. Absolutely horrible. I'm sure there were people at the time saying, Chip can't handle a locker room, Chip doesn't have control of his players, this is ridiculous, and all this sort of stuff. Worked out pretty well. Won a lot of games. By the way, outside the University of Oregon, Nick Saban, first year at Alabama, lost to UL-Monroe. It's unthinkable now. Unthinkable that Alabama could lose to a team like that, but Saban did in his first season because there's a learning curve when you're a head coach. Brian Kelly just got a taste of it over the weekend. Was that offense ready to go? Nope. Were the special teams buttoned up? Nope. And guess what? They lost because of those two things. The defense was there, but the offense couldn't move the ball in what was an unbelievable college football game. I mean, in the final 90 seconds, you had a fumble on the 1 yard, or you had a muffed punt, a fumble on the 1, a 99-yard drive, a tense review, a touchdown, and a blocked extra point. Incredible. It was absolute insanity. I hope the rest of the college football season is this good. But is that what you think Brian Kelly's LSU teams are going to look like 1 to 2 years from now? No. No, that's not the way it goes. Anytime you go to a new place, take a new job as a head football coach, it takes time. There is a learning curve. There is a lot more that you have to deal with as a head coach than you do just as a defensive or offensive coordinator or as a special teams coordinator or a position coach or whatever you were before. It's more as a head coach, not just in a football sense, but everything else that goes into game day, right? Having your guys ready, making sure everybody's traveling, got places to stay, got food. Like you have to be more involved with that than you do if you're a coordinator. You're a coordinator, you get to show up and, for the most part, not exclusively, you get to focus on football. But Dan Lanning, as the head coach, has to deal with everything that is involved with a program going to Atlanta, getting on plane, and all that sort of stuff. He's more involved with that. It's a different feel for him. There is an adjustment. And yes, schematically, there's an adjustment too, because Lanning is helping to set the game plan with the offensive and defensive coordinators, and he's more involved. He's stretched more thin than he was as the DC at Georgia. There is an adjustment, and it's very reasonable to look at it and say, yeah, how Dan Lanning and the staff performed in that game, which was pretty darn bad on both sides of the ball. Offense not quite as bad as the defense, but neither side was very good from an execution standpoint, which comes back down to coaching. It's reasonable to assume that they're going to be better a year from now than they were in that game. Doesn't mean they could beat Georgia a year from now, but it means they'd be better than what they were on Saturday afternoon, because that was a really ugly thing to watch. But it's important to not overreact. This is not a panic time for Oregon football where we should be coming in and saying, like, oh my gosh, that was so bad. It was worse than we expected. Yeah, it was worse than we expected. It's been worse than we expected before. It has. It has happened time and time again in college football. A coach gets off to a rocky start. And look, some coaches don't turn around. Maybe in 2 years, I will be able to come on the show and make a legitimate case for why Dan Lanning should no longer be Oregon football's head coach. I can't make that case right now in good faith. I cannot, and neither can anybody else. I think the Duck fans that are feeling that way or would have that urge to, even legitimately question it, it's just a frustration because it's a long off season in football, right? This is why it's the greatest sport in the world. The off season's long, the season is condensed, it is urgent, and one game means more in this great sport, specifically college football, compared to the NFL. Unfortunately, we're going to move away from that, but I'm not going to lament that right now. One game means more in this sport than in any other sport in the world that is not postseason. That's true. That's why college football is the best. And that's why fans are so frustrated. That's why people have that sense of this is terrible, this is no good. And yeah, it sucks. I hate the feeling too. I feel the same way you do in that every time I go into the ESPN app to check the Mariners score, always repping, baby. I hope this is the year. Better be the year. I go in there and I see Oregon 3, Georgia 49. And it's painful to look at in the ESPN app. It is. It's not fun to see. But it's 1 week. And there's another component to the fact that it's 1 week and how this season in and of itself could evolve, let alone the future coaching prospects of Dan Lanning. And I'll tell you how after I remind you this episode brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. This episode is brought to you by the easiest place to spice up the college football season. That is Underdog Fantasy. They place a heavy emphasis on getting started, which is very easy, and you can watch your favorite team play, and it's easy to play while you watch your favorite team play. You can win cold, hard cash in a single game. Underdog has investment backing for Mark Cuban, Kevin Durant, Adam Schefter, and more. You might have heard of some of those guys, and they've always been focused on building superior products for a fun user experience. That's why they are so great, and we're happy to have them as a sponsor here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Sign up with the promo code Locked On, 2 words. Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100. Deposit $100, get $100 free, and gamble away. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com or find the Underdog Fantasy app in the App Store or Google Play Store. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code Locked On. Get in on the college football pick'em action today. It's not a good feeling right now for Oregon football. It's not. It sucks being 0-1. It sucks having lost the way we did. It sucks being so excited for a game and for it to be that much of a letdown, and it was frankly only competitive for maybe half a quarter or so. Offense had a couple nice drives that made you think, okay, maybe we can hang around for a little bit, and then they didn't. They were not able to execute. Was not a fun feeling. Was not a fun game. One of the worst losses Oregon has had probably since Washington's 70-21 in 2017 when the Huskies went to the playoff and Justin Herbert was starting as a freshman and that defense was horrendous. It's probably the worst loss since then. Probably. Just from a feeling standpoint, like that one really, boy, that didn't feel good. The Utah games a year ago, yeah, those are up there too. But you also have to factor in that. Well, actually, yeah, those were pretty bad. But Utah at least didn't get to 40 points in either of those games. So at least there's that, I think. I hope, maybe. But it's not a good feeling. But how you feel as a fan at the start of a college football season is rarely indicative of how you'll feel at the end of the season. Need I remind you, and I am going to. 2011, it started with LSU, competitive for a half. LSU pulled away in the third with a couple turnovers, and final score I believe was 40-27 or something like that, which I really would have taken over the weekend against Georgia, but alas, we did not get that. That's how the season started. Was that a good feeling? You had that same gut in your stomach for a week where you're just like 0-1, lost 2 games in a row going back to last year. Like that's just I don't like that feeling. It doesn't feel good. And no, it does not. That year ended with a Rose Bowl victory. And who doesn't like winning the Rose Bowl? Because I like winning the Rose Bowl. Put me in that camp. If you won the Rose Bowl, that means you won the Pac-12, most likely. Unless a Pac-12 team gets in the playoff, but now that Utah lost, yeah, that's probably not going to happen. 2017, right? It can go in the opposite direction too. In 2017, we started 3-0, had a win against Nebraska, who appeared to be a solid team. Herbert was the quarterback, and it looked like, yeah, this is going to be a good year. And then by the end of it, Ducks were 7-6. Lost the Las Vegas Bowl to Boise State. Taggart went to Florida State. Herbert got injured. You don't know. But it was a completely different feeling by the end of the year. 2019, a loss to Auburn, ended with a Pac-12 championship and a Rose Bowl victory. 2021, the other direction. College football playoff aspirations against Ohio State. Go out, lay an egg against Stanford. All of a sudden, you're looking up going, okay, well, maybe we can hang around, but if we're not beating that Stanford team by a lot, is this a team that can really do it? And then we learned later in the year, yeah, no, they could not. They were not at a college football playoff level. Over the course of a season, 1 week can change everything. If Oregon wins its next 5 games, which they'll have a chance to do, starting with Eastern Washington this week, at home against BYU the following week in what should be a very, very good college football game that I think Oregon can most definitely and will win. If you win 5 in a row and you're 5-1 and your one loss is to Georgia, you're going to forget it pretty quick. Because remember what I said earlier, 1 week is more impactful in this sport than in any other in the world. So if you're feeling that sense of, I hate this, I hate being 0-1, I hate that it went that way, it was on national TV, it was embarrassing. Yep, it was. But a lot can change over the course of a season. And how the season ends is not always indicative of how it began. It can completely change. You can have despair at the beginning and triumph at the end, or you can have the utmost optimism to start and a massive letdown at the end. It is a long, long season, and there's still a lot for the Ducks to play for here. I did not think they were a playoff team coming into this year, and that game against Georgia confirmed what I believed. Can they still win the Pac-12? Yeah, of course. Pac-12 play hasn't even started yet. Won't start for another 3 weeks. It's a long ways away. Do they need to make adjustments? Do they need to make improvements? Yeah, the staff knows that, and they're going to get in the room, look at the film, and say, here's how we can be better, and here's how we can be better over here. Like that's what coaches do. And the test of Dan Lanning and the staff is not just whether or not they'll be able to make schematic upgrades from what happened in the first week, or improve upon open field tackling, or improve upon just overall play execution, or Bo Nix not turning the ball over. All that sort of stuff is one component, but the other thing is how do you handle that locker room? And what Dan Lanning said in his press conference after this Georgia game, I thought was pretty encouraging. Number one, he took responsibility for it, said, we didn't have him. I always want that from my head coach. Always, always, always step to the podium and say, yep, we didn't have him ready. And by the way, sometimes his coach speak, but in this instance, it was 100% true. The Oregon coaching staff got worked in that game. Georgia had better players, yes. They did not have 49-3 better players. That is a coaching gap. Where over here on this sideline, you had Kirby Smart, the reigning national champions, and a well-oiled machine that has won as coordinators like Dan Lanning have come and gone. And over here, you had a first-time head coach, a first-time full-time play caller, incorporating a quarterback into a new offense. That's a lot. Continuity, change. Advantage continuity, just about every single time. And I think that that's an important thing to remember there. But Lanning was talking in his post-game press conference about how the guys are disappointed that the game went this way, but they're hungry, right? And there was no, throwing of helmets. There was no finger pointing, nothing like that. No, they want to get better. They want to go watch film, get to practice, and they're inching it back out on the field. That's the vibe that he's got to be able to actually instill. One thing to say it at a podium, another thing to have it take place at practice throughout the week, and then for that to materialize in positive results on Saturdays. But that's what is next for this Oregon football team. Yep, you got punched in the mouth, you got embarrassed, and it was ugly. How are you going to respond? In 2019, the Ducks should have won that game against Auburn, but they didn't. How'd they respond? They only lost one conference game. Just the one. All season long. How's this team going to respond? It's the first big test for Dan Lanning in his coaching career, as he is now the head man for the Ducks and not just a defensive coordinator. Okay. Was there anything good in that Georgia game? Like anything at all? I mean, there were a couple things. It was pretty hard to find them. The fact that special teams is an unquestionable positive or one of the few positives, is something I hope we never have to say again here on the show. But Camden Lewis made his field goal attempt. Everything else, it was solid. Nothing spectacular, nothing special, but special teams, they were solid. And that was a glaring weakness a year ago, and something I talked about leading up to this season that I thought Oregon could improve upon. And so far, so good. And Camden Lewis looked like the Camden Lewis of 2021, which is a guy that I would certainly take as my place kicker here in 2022. And if he wants to be even better than he was a year ago, yeah, I would take that as well. Another thing that I talked about going into that Georgia game was the offensive line. I thought it was critical that they hold up if Oregon was going to have a chance. And overall, they did. Overall, they they did hold up. I know there's a video going around of Jalen Carter, who's probably going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, just absolutely dispensing Big Sala like a tackling dummy before making a stop on an Oregon running back. It was one play. It was a very impressive play, and it was a very dominant play. But one reason that it was getting so much attention was because everyone knew, yeah, that was a good Oregon offensive line, and those guys are all good. And though Big Sol is probably the weakest of the group, he's still quite good and has been very solid and productive. And the fact that Jalen Carter did it to a player of his caliber is what makes him a highly coveted NFL draft prospect in the 2023 NFL draft. But the offensive line as a whole held up. 4.5 yards a carry, right? If you do that against Georgia, what are you going to be able to do against Colorado, against UCLA, Arizona, heck, even Cal that has a good defense, right? One of the best defenses in the Pac-12 year in and year out is Cal in Utah. We watched the Utah game a season ago. We've seen Cal year after year. They have good defenses, no doubt. Is anything Oregon is going to go up against this year going to be in the same category as that Georgia defense? The answer is no. And Oregon was able to create lanes for the running backs and for the most part keep Bo Nix upright. There were a couple breakdowns, but that's going to happen when you have a bunch of NFL guys on the other side. Even if you have NFL guys in your offensive line, that defensive front for Georgia is a bunch of beasts. Absolutely ferocious animals, and they showed that. But overall, I was pleased with how the offensive line played. There were a number of passing plays. I don't know why I said throwing, whatever. There were a number of passing plays where Bo Nix stood back there and he had a lot of time. He had a lot of time to throw. And that was something I talked about during the preseason leading up to this game as well. Is Bo Nix could be poised for his best year because he's got a good offensive line, and because he's got some weapons and he didn't have a great offensive line and running game all the time while he was at Auburn. For the most part, he had time to throw. He still made a couple of mistakes, but that's because he's also thrown against Georgia's secondary in the game because, as we saw, they've got NFL guys ready and waiting to step in when everybody left for the NFL. Keely Ringo among them, and I forgot the name of the guy who made the diving interception, but that was just a heck of a play. And I said this yesterday on the show with Max Torres, but I'll say it again if you missed that one. I do not dislike at all that first interception from Bo Nix. The second one, horrible. That is just a bad read. It was a poorly executed play. Looked like guys were running routes too close together. It was a little too predictable. I just that one was bad from everybody involved, especially Bo Nix, because he needed to make a better read and ultimately just check it down to the running back running the little bubble out there. They're trying to get the fake. But that first interception, I have no problem with that whatsoever. What have we been clamoring for all offseason since Anthony Brown left the program for the NFL? Throw the ball down the field. They took a shot. They had a one-on-one, which is something Kenny Dillingham way, way long ago talked about bringing as an offensive philosophy when he says pro-style offense, creating one-on-one situations. And Bo Nix threw a pretty good ball. And Seven McGee wasn't quite able to compose himself to make a play on it, but the other guy made a better play. I mean, if the defensive back, loses his footing just like a fraction, it might go beyond his hands or it's only tipped, and Seven McGee has a better chance to make a play on it. Would I have rather seen that ball thrown up to a Troy Franklin, Chase Cota, or Dante Thornton? Yeah, sure. But do I hate that Bo Nix saw one-on-one and trusted his guy to go up there and make a play and made a solid throw? No, not really, because that's what the offense was missing a year ago. And you got to be willing to take those shots. And I'm okay doing it against Georgia because you weren't going to win with a conservative approach. And generally speaking, this season in the Pac-12, I don't think it's going to be beneficial for the offense to go back to just kind of dinking and dunking their way down the field. Like, take some shots. You got playmakers out there. Yeah, the defensive backs on Georgia are better. But as you get into Pac-12 play, they're not going to be at that level. Linebackers, defensive line, secondary. Nothing is going to be like what we saw on Saturday and like what the Ducks saw on Saturday. They're going to be going up against guys. It's like when I grew up, I was really, and I still am really close with my older brother and all of our friends who are his age. We played a lot of sports together. I played a lot of sports against my brother and his friends who were 3 grades older than me. And I would play against them at our house or in the backyard or wherever. And I tried to hold my own as best I could. And sometimes, yeah, it was a challenge. But then when I went and played kids my own grade and my own size, it didn't seem so hard. Oregon's going to undergo that here. Like, yeah, one-on-one shot to Seven McGee with a pretty well thrown ball did not work out against Georgia. But against another team in the Pac-12, yeah, it might work out next time. And I like that Bo was able to develop that sort of confidence with his receivers. The other thing that I thought stood out as a positive, I think I think the offensive line is the biggest positive, and this is probably the second one. Oregon has a lot of good running backs. We saw 5 in this game. We did see Jordan James a little. He's not ready for Georgia at this point in time. I don't know how much we'll see him as the year goes on, but I'm good with whoever Oregon throws out there at running back. I know some Duck fans were a little surprised maybe that Byron Cardwell was the 4th running back to see the field. It was Bucky Irving first, and then Sean Dollars was out there, and then Noah Whittington, and then Cardwell was out there as well. But they all got involved. They all got touches. Having that depth at that position, I think, is excellent, and I trust all of them in some form or another. I was not surprised to see Cardwell as the number 4 back. I like Byron Cardwell. Talked about him this offseason, but I was also pretty adamant that I wouldn't be surprised if he was not the number 1 back, even though a lot of Duck fans expected it. He doesn't finish runs very well. If you watch, he's very tentative. He kind of shies away from contact. He has good speed, vision, and patience. Those are his positive attributes that make me want to continue to see him on the field. But what I imagine that staff is seeing is what I've seen from him, and that's that he has not developed an ability to be a physical presence as a ball carrier, whether he's catching the ball in the flat or not. When contact is coming, he's kind of bracing himself and going down and not fighting for those extra yards. Whereas all the other guys, Dollars, who I thought looked good, a Bucky Irving, who had some nice moments, and Noah Whittington, who had a couple good runs, they are all finishing runs. And I think that's why they have put themselves above Cardwell in the depth chart. But regardless, having four guys that I feel confident in running the football or catching passes or being involved in the offense in some way or another, that's a really good place to be. And there are other depth chart things that were noteworthy, like Triquez Bridges starting at corner. That's concerning to me, perhaps a subject for another day. But I trust Oregon's running backs. I trust the offensive line. Bo Nix is not going to be playing Georgia again, and neither is the rest of the Oregon team, and that's good. And that's when we'll be able to make the most fair assessment, right? Eastern Washington, sure, we'll see some things, but BYU, I think, is going to be the biggest indicator of, all right, who's going to be a consistent contributor in Pac 12 play and who needs to maybe see their role reduced a little bit. Appreciate everyone listening. See you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.